I'm sure none of you need introduction for Krish, but out of my duty as a host, Krish is the Group Head of Human Resource Development at Infosys. He has over 30 years of experience and has led HR functions in organizations like Bharti Airtel, Philips, Hindustan Unilever, and Unilever. He holds a postgraduate diploma in HR from XLRI Jamshedpur and has received an executive certificate in strategy and organization from the Stanford Graduate School of Business and a doctorate in business administration from Aston University. He's the author of the book Catalyse Power Up Your People Ecosystem, a much acclaimed playbook for HR, blogs occasionally on LinkedIn as well, as I'm sure most of you all would have had a touch point with that. However, introduction aside, having had the proud privilege of working with Krish both at Infosys and NHRD, I would like to describe Krish as a leader who builds more leaders and that too for a lifetime, hands down. So over to you, Krish.
Okay, thank you, Achla. Thank you. Pleasure to see you all. And good morning, everybody. Great to be here. I'm actually in a city which has a airline code, which yesterday I saw. The airline code of the city is OTP, something very, very familiar to all of us. So maybe you can Google and find out what city is it that has a airline code of OTP. But anyway, firstly, good to be here. I think NHRD Showcase is something that has been a wonderful event, so many years. I think many HR people have learned, many HR people have really, actually got great ideas from the showcase, including myself, and my team. So I would just say this is a fantastic opportunity, and thanks to NHRD Bangalore for continuing this wonderful tradition. It's a pleasure to be here, and good morning. Now, Achla, is it okay? I mean, are you on time? Aren't you ahead to start off,
Yes,
or should we
yes, very.
just
We
start
are very
off?
much on time.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so I think the point is, I was just thinking and saying, listen, where are we in HR? And there's been a lot of things happening. Yeah. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes really talking about a couple of things, which I think are uh, some learnings over the last couple of years, but also some kind of an agenda for us to take HR into the future. Yeah. So let me just try and do that. And in my mind, this is all about how can we build a much more resilient, empathetic, responsive HR for the future. Yeah. So let me just try and talk about it. I had a couple of slides, but I won't use them. It's good to really talk through it, and then I'm really happy if anyone has any questions for me to really answer those questions. Yeah. Now let's just step back. Let's say 2020 to now we are at the end of 2022. So the last 3 years. I think the last 3 years have seen some of I mean, if anybody has been in HR in the last 3 years, he or she has seen like the microcosm of all changes that's possible. Yeah. And some things people have never seen before. We've all seen that in the last 3 years. We've seen a huge pandemic and the challenges that the pandemic brought. Yeah. We had the challenge of quickly responding to the crisis, moving to remote and managing your operations. That's the first stage. Then this whole thing about taking care of your people as they moved into remote and engaging them and managing everything, in a remote way. That was the second thing. This whole wellness, taking care of your people, both during COVID in terms of all the support for hospitalization, etc., and then various other things, which then followed up with so much work that I call that people said on things like mental health. So that was the other thing that we did, and things like mental health, burnout, stress, all came to the fore. So we saw all of that. And I think, we saw a high of engagement in the first couple of quarters where people felt, globally, this is there, and that people felt that this was a very different thing. But over time, you also saw a little bit of kind of stress and burnout, which brought the engagement down over the first 6 months of the pandemic. So as we were getting used to the pandemic, we also saw right from January 2021 onwards, especially in the tech industry and many others also, this whole great demand or great hiring, great resignation, whatever you want to call it. We've seen the whole last 2 years been never ever before heights of hiring, never ever before heights of attrition. And many companies had to come up with so many solutions to really take care of it. So that was another big thing. And we've been through many things, looking at, compensation, looking at value proposition, etc., etc. And over these 2 years, employees' perceptions and what they want is also changing. Well-being is becoming important. Flexibility is becoming important. I mean, what are you going to give your employee now from 2019 to now is very different. Now they all want lots more flexibility in their roles. They want lots more learning in their roles. They want, this focus on well-being. So these have become much more important. Of course, compensation is always there. That's also increased. But there are other things that have become very important for employees. And we've been learning and we've been trying to really make all of that happen. While all this is happening, the industry is also changing. A lot of newer things, the growth of e-commerce, the growth of digital work all across, and the use of increased technology everywhere is really becoming much more. So you've seen that these last 3 years has been a year of what I call as lots of new challenges and lots of actions that companies have taken. Yeah, and they've shown a lot of resilience in making all this happen. Sometimes we learned along the way. Sometimes we knew. Sometimes we tried. We experimented. There are many things we don't know. For example, there is all this whole new concept of moonlighting. Yes, no, good, bad. We don't know. Maybe these are areas we will work through as we go along. So therefore, there are lots of areas that are coming up. But when I step back and you say, okay, what made these things possible? Success possible. You'll find that there are some companies that have done much better, and some may not have done much better. Some may have done much better on some areas. Some may not have done much better on some areas. So therefore, we got to just understand over the last 3 years what is it. I think the thing that really helped, that is needed in all of this, you see in the last 3 years, is a lot of leadership, a lot of focus of the leadership. How close they are to the ground, how agile, how they take decisions. That's number one. Number two, it's also about empathy. How do you continuously, now it's about so much change happening. If you're stuck in a mindset which is 3-4 years old, you will not be able to do the right thing. So we got to also understand and empathizing with various stakeholders, everyone, and seeing what is it, whether it's your employees or your clients, and see what is happening. So that's becoming very important. I think the third thing is building what I call as resilience or agility in whatever you're doing. That's the other thing that is also very, very critical, that people have got have done. If they have done that, they've been more successful. Now, so I think these are some learnings. Now the question is, we've all learned up and down, we've picked up something. How do you go forward? How do you really plan and institutionalize this in HR and build a much more resilient, agile HR for the future? Yeah, and I'll try and talk about a couple of things here. And there are two concepts I want to just talk about, which I think will probably help us. I think the first I was just looking at is just thinking about what makes some company more resilient than the others. So let's just think about it. And I was reading a recent research article by BCG. You can read that. I think BCG Henderson Institute has published something. I think there are three key things. I think the first one is what they call as an anticipation gap. Therefore, some companies are better at anticipating things. They have processes, they have the leadership to be anticipating. And if you can anticipate better, at least let's say you can anticipate things in advance, you can plan better. So therefore, there is this anticipation gap. For example, if you anticipated that, listen, there's going to be huge talent crunch in the next year, I mean, in 2020, we could have planned better. Not many companies saw that coming that fast. So there is this anticipation gap. But just anticipation is not enough. We also got to act on it. So therefore, but the key thing is, are we having processes that are close to the ground, looking at feedback, seeing what is happening, and taking decisions? That's the second. The second part is the impact gap. Suppose there is an issue. Now, how do you manage your impact? Are you having resilient processes? Are there enough flexibility in what you're doing to reduce the impact of any challenge that you have or any shock? Suddenly, take example COVID, and when COVID came, there is some companies had a bigger impact, some may have had a lesser impact. It varied within industry, across industry. But within the industry, maybe some have done better than the others. So how was that? What was the flexibility they had? And how can we build that flexibility into our HR processes? That's the second one. And the third one is what I would call as the bouncing back, or are they able to really, if there is anything and you want to ride a wave, are you able to catch that and move forward? Yeah, the bouncing back, the ability to really bounce back or resurging. And that is, for example, these are all quick waves that you got to catch. For example, in tech industry, you see that there's this whole wave of cloud that is going. Are you able to take that wave and move faster on that wave? Yeah. So I think these are the three key areas, and therefore there are various things that we've got to keep in mind. This whole anticipation issue, as a company, as HR, are we anticipating things better? Once we anticipate, are we able to plan it? How do we have systems and processes to do that? How's our internal flexibility and resilience of our HR systems to quickly respond, change to any impact or shock, or quick need in business? Are we able to do that fast? What are we able to do? And thirdly, if you want to really grow, and bounce back again, this whole ability to really put the resources behind it and do that. I think we've got to think of these and build it into our HR systems. So now let me come to HR. And I think there are three or four areas that I wanted to talk about here. I think if you look at over time, um, there have been many what I call as levers of value, yeah, that companies had. In the old days, there were levers of value, like, for example, capital. If you had great capital, then you could really be successful. If you had access to what you call, government facilities, licenses, you could grow, yeah. But all those have gone now. Now I think the key thing is there are just a couple of things which are really sustainable sources of value. Yeah, number one is your talent. The talent, the skills they have, the mindset they have. And talent is not just number of people, but are they able to do what you want them to do? Yeah, that's number one. The second is your culture. Uh, And do we have the right culture? And have we built a culture around? I'll talk a little bit around it. And the third, I would say, is your reputation or your brand, which you got to really work on. I think these three are much more longer term and much more sustainable sources of values for organization as you go forward. And I just want to really look at these three and say, okay, if if we want to build a much more resilient, agile HR for the future, we know we're going to have such changes. What we've seen in the last 3 years, you're going to see that. We're now seeing a bit of a possible slowdown, but within a couple of quarters, things may go up, new things may come up. Are we ready for it? And how does HR really plan for the future? So I think there are three or four things I would like to really suggest in each of these areas. Yeah. So let's just start. I think the first one is, if you're looking at your talent, I think there are two paths that as HR we've got to keep looking at. The first one is, as you go into the future, are we having the right, what I would call as, refreshed employee value proposition? Are you thinking about it? Because as I said, over the last 3 years, what employees want is changing. There are different things they had. It goes up and down, but I think over time there are newer people come into the workforce. The world is changing, so they want things differently. So I said the top three things: they want lots more flexibility, they want lots more focus on well-being and the support. They also want, what I would call as, lots of ability to be ready for the future, reskilling. Yeah, so therefore that's the not reskilling. I mean, are you providing me opportunities to learn so that I can grow? And they want to really grow much faster. And the last 2 years of opportunities has shown that there's so much growth happening, and they all want to really, the best ones want to grow much faster. So, are you able to really provide that? The much more differentiated rate of growth for good performers, much more differentiated thing for guys who are really learning and performing. And therefore, we as HR, we got to think about it and look at some elements of a value proposition and keep changing, yeah, and therefore make it more relevant, because that's what people now need. Yeah. So that's, I think, and this is something we got to keep doing every 2 years, saying, are we right there? I think the second part on talent is, As businesses grow up and down, as business grow fast, is your whole talent model flexible enough? And that's where I think as HR we've got to come in. Are we looking at different sources of talent so that we can build in and not just sticking to the same old source that everybody wants to go to? Are we doing enough? I mean, suppose there is a sudden increase in demand for talent. Do you have the capability to do that? Do you have an internal reskilling engine that is working? Do you have an internal learning engine that is helping people? Are you creating enough flexibility for people to move around? So therefore, I think we got to just look at our internal systems for talent and say, is it really meeting three things? Is it meeting the flexibility needs? And therefore, is it meeting the needs for people to really upskill and go forward? And is it meeting the needs of the business for the future? Yeah. So, is your talent ready for the future? And is the whole engine ready for it? I think that's something we've got to really look at. So, I think these are the two key things as HR we got to rethink and start looking at within the whole talent part. Now let's look at culture. I think culture is very, very important. And as we say, and culture is just not, I think sometimes, let me just, whenever we talk of culture, we talk of day to day, things that we like or don't like. But I always see that culture in any organization is made up of two parts. There is one part which is at the base level, which is all about the basic human values. Yeah. It's about things like, respect, dignity, inclusion, things that are very important that people want. That I think is needed if you want to be a company to attract good people to make them stay, you need something there. So that's one part of the culture you need. But there's another part. The other part is the behaviors you need for your business to be successful, for your organization to be successful. So, and these could be different. These could be saying, listen, I want to be an organization that's much more customer responsive than any others. Or I want to be an organization that is much more innovative and and do lots more focus on innovation than any other. So you want to choose one or two which are there. And that is really which will, both these is what is important. So as we go forward and when we look at so much change happening, I think the elements of culture we got to build are basically the ones of agility, resilience, and moving and learning and moving fast. And to do that, I think that's where we as HR have to first get, I think, the role of leaders and managers, and how do you really train them to talk about it, and we have to really work with them to think about it and coach them. We as HR have to really look at our own culture and say, what are some of the things we can do in this area to build a much more resilient organization? So this whole concept of, anticipation, do we have that within HR? Do we have it within the organization? Do we help them discuss it and take it forward? This whole aspect of, impact, how do we build more flexibility? I think those are some things we got to see. So I think culture is important. Define the culture in these two elements. The basic human values, there again, you may say, I want these two or three, which is very important for my organization. Keep that. But more important is the behaviors that will also help you be successful. As we define it, I think that's another area that HR can play a big role in building as we go forward. I think the last part is your reputation or your brand. I think this is something which is intangible. People sometimes don't see it as important, but it has a great source of things. So therefore, the brand is not built over years. Companies, it's built over 40 years, 50 years. I mean, a company like Infosys, you have founders who have built something. I think that powerful legacy of the founders continues, and you got to continue to build on it. And at investment in brand, investment in that reputation comes through everything. It comes through your people. Every individual has to come and make an impact on the brand of the company. And that's where this nowadays social media, we got to think and use and say how you can build that. Leaders play a big role in continuing to do that. And what we do in HR has a great role in at least looking at our employer brand, not just your product brand, but the employer brand. So I think that's another area we got to invest a lot more, because I think that over times of crisis or times of thing, that really plays a strong role. So I'll stop there. I think what we have seen in the last 3 years is phenomenal number of changes. We've seen changes that we've never seen ever before. We've seen peaks, and as HR, we have to really learn quickly, respond, and go ahead and do things. As we now, and if you look back, I think what makes people successful or what make organizations successful were clearly things like agility, empathy, the role of leadership, and how HR has been responsive in making things. We now move forward. We say, listen, how do you really build that as a more resilient organization as you go forward, or a more resilient HR as you go forward? So, therefore, there are three key levers, again, just to summarize, that you got to keep in mind: the talent, the culture, and the brand. I think you got to define in each of these, what are we doing as HR to build greater agility, resilience, and flexibility, and keeping them ready for the future. Yeah, this is a great investment. And some of it is not something you'll see results now, but I think you got to step back and say, let's try and build it because this will help us in the future. So, great. I just thought I'll just give these few thoughts. I'm really happy to take a couple of questions and go forward from here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Question: how do we simplify HR, make us fearless and more relevant to masses or versus leader only?
Excellent. I think this is a great question. I think we got to keep asking this in HR, and this is one area that I sometimes find that what happens is, as companies grow bigger, as we see more problems, HR, and we try to really create processes to take care of all kinds of issues. Yeah, and HR then over time becomes a little bit clunky, a little bit, process oriented. But this is not through any bad intention. It is just for HR being saying, listen, there are so many issues coming. How do I make this happen? And over time, we also want to, we've had some bad experience where somewhere we've empowered, somewhere decisions have not been right. And therefore, we ensure that processes try and overcorrect some of those. I think the first way where HR can simplify, number one, is you've got to ensure that there is the right culture in the organization, the way the managers take decisions, the way the leaders take decisions. If you believe that they will take decisions in the right spirit and that you have that right culture, I think that will firstly help HR, because I think they are the key leaders, and I think that's something we've got to do. And then you step back and say, how can you simplify? And I think there are, why are we getting into so many of these things? Yeah, I think two or three things, if we can do better, it'll help. Number one, this culture and how we can empower managers and leaders a lot more. Number two, I think it is about also doing a lot more what I would call as design thinking, understanding what is happening on the ground, and trying to see if we can learn from it and design our processes in a much more integrated way. So that's another one. Third is try and use technology. Nowadays, I think people wants lots more things done digitally. Young people, I mean, they're very keen to really do things much more digitally, etc., etc. Therefore, that's another one that you can do. And fourth, I think it is the whole principle of how much you want to empower. I think the more HR can empower, the simpler HR can become. Yeah. And I think, and that connects to the first one about your culture. So take a look. I think it'll be good for every of us. And I always want myself to take a look of where we are, what are the areas we can look at to simplify, how we can really try and use some of these, the role of the managers, middle managers, the role of the leaders, the role of technology, and understanding what people really want and designing HR. So those will help us simplify it.
Okay. Is how do we drive agility? Is it at a policy level or what more can be done?
Yeah, I think again, if you look at it, what is agility? Agility is ability to respond quickly. Yeah. And therefore, you got to really think about three or four things you got to build. Firstly, an ability to do good anticipation. Yeah. So therefore, and that needs both systems and a culture. Systems like, for example, you're looking at data, reviewing data in the future. So are we having right systems to show you the data that show what is happening? I mean, data to talk about what is happening, and just take employees in terms of employees perceptions, what employees want, what do they perceive, what are some of the things. So get data and start looking at it, and this has to be done in a much more systematic way. So that's the first one. Try and anticipate. Second one, and therefore that anticipation will give you the data to take action. Once you anticipate, the second one is quickly act. And this is where I think it's a mix of two. It's about culture and what is the role HR and the leaders play. And number two, it's also about how much empowered and what processes you have. So you've got to have there both of these. And how much are you willing to take small pilot steps and say, let me try and do that? Yeah. In large companies, any big intervention or change will take time, because you got to understand, get people involved, design the systems, and by the time you kind of roll it out, it takes a long time. So how can you pilot it? Get one or two people, pilot it in a couple of areas. That helps you being more agile, and you see good results and do that. And the third one is, if you look at HR, there are, like, for example, I always look at HR in two parts, what I call as HR effectiveness and HR efficiency. HR efficiency is things that we do within HR which can help us do things better. Say, for example, a lead time to offer, can you cut it down from whatever 20 days to 15 days, or number of learning days, or what are you doing? So these are all internal efficiency metrics. But the effectiveness metrics are very important. It's about how are you delivering to the business, or is the business metrics improving? That needs what I call as more integrative HR, and there HR has to work with the business in an integrated way and make that. And to have agility, you need that integrative way of working, in HR. So work with the business, ensure there are processes where you work together to really make that happen. So I think it's not easy. I can say a few words, but building agility needs both the mindset and the culture, but as well as processes, both of these.
Okay, wonderful. I can really see the number of questions overflowing and also a very impactful one. So, the next question we have is, how do you see organizational power playing in the future? Do you think leaders will continue to still hold power?
My God, this is a very well. I don't know. I think, see, in any organization, I think people who can influence hold power. Yeah, I think that's what it is. I think the future is who can influence decisions, who can influence success of an organization. And that's where I think they get the thing. Who can get more resources. Um, I think it keeps varying, it keeps shifting. For example, if you're a very high, what do you call, one of the key talent who's got great skills and great value in the market, you can influence more for the business, and therefore people, in the organization will listen to you a lot more. So I don't think it's that easy. It'll keep shifting. Um, and again, it power is different in different situation, different contexts. But I would say that who can influence more the success of the company or the decisions will have more power. And again, there will be some employees too who are critical, who got great skills, who can have that power. So I think that's how I would look at it.
Okay. And the next question we have from Chini. And what can the HR professional do to prepare themselves for all of these changes?
I think I'll put this into, I would say, two or three broad buckets. Yeah, in a way. The first one is what I would call as a mindset bucket. Yeah, I always want to look at what I need in the mindset. I think there are two things we need to be in HR. Number one, we got to have this mindset of a little bit of humility, saying, "Listen, I don't know enough. Let me learn." And that's number one. And number two, this whole mindset of saying, "Listen, I want to really co-create things, work with others to do it." I think these two are important as mindset and HR to really make things happen. Yeah, because especially in this kind of a thing. So I think HR people don't go with a fixed mindset. Be open. Look at saying, "Listen, I don't know. Maybe I can explore. Maybe things have changed. Maybe what I thought in the past is not relevant anymore." I think those are some of the things we've got to do, because sometimes we all go with the fixed thing, saying this is what it is, and I know. But things may be different. Yes. Therefore, always go with that open mindset, little bit of humility, but also go with a mindset of co-creation and collaboration and saying, "Let me try and work this." So those are the two things which I would call as the mindset. Then comes this whole idea of skills. I think the skills here is HR has to really do three or four areas. Be much more understanding of what are happening in the business, much more connected with the various issues in the business, and the levers that are there. So that I think continuously working, thinking about it will help you, sharpen that. See, business is no great rocket science. You don't have to need hundreds. You don't need to know the technology, but simple levers of the business, simple levers of what makes the model go and how does it, and what are the various things that influence it. That's something you got to get a better understanding. Number two, I think HR is also now trying to have lots more newer things that we've got to learn. The way, like, let's say, newer behavioral science techniques, positive psychology, behavioral economics. So a lot of newer ideas are there that I think we can learn and influence. Analytics and using analytics in the right way. I mean, analytics is not just creating Excels and looking at it, but put it in a way where people can take decisions in the flow of work, where people can take decisions in, for example, in in the at key strategic things they can take those decisions. Then I think HR will be wonderful. So I think I would say we've got to build these three things. Number one, a mindset. Number two, certain skills that are there. And thirdly, I think this behavior of HR people learning to influence more. Yeah. So therefore, how can we be better in influencing? That should be the other thing. So I would say these are some skills that HR people should learn.
Okay, thank you so much, Krish, for that. And a trivia over here. Anytime, or anyone who's worked with Krish, be it at Infi or NHRD, would know you enter into a meeting with him and then you do feel that you do not know anything. So the growth mindset gets implicit for all of us. And I think that's how we have all been able to do. Whatever we could do as HR professionals, and so it's not just the answer. Krish actually exemplifies that absolutely, and I think that's why all of us are indeed able to do the best that we could do. Okay, and in the era of tech companies overall in US, what's your take on empathy and retrenchment hand in hand?
Yeah, I think there's always a thing. See, US has always been a company where I think they would really take a decision because there's enough safety net in that country. So we got to just take the context differently. So they have different things there. And US companies sometimes I think they have to take decisions much more because of the market. So you find sometimes they are a little bit they lack this empathy etc. But I think it comes from their background. Comes It's not that they don't have empathy completely, but there is enough safety net built there. So you've seen this in the past that they can take a decision, they may quickly kind of retrench, and they will just move on. So I would say, in a way, one would like lots more empathy, etc., etc. But I don't think we should jump to conclusions. Maybe those companies have done those discussions, maybe they've done those changes, but to the outsider, it always seems that they've done it in the thing. But I think you got to understand their own context and do that. But also, as we look at it, the world is also changing. I think there needs to be empathy, but people are also saying, listen, we also have to look at the success of the company. We also have to look at the survival of the company for the future. Therefore, more empathy for the rest of the people in the company. That's also the other viewpoint. So I think it's a balance that we've got to do, and that's where I think a lot more planning, and a lot more thoughtful work or planning would always help every organization. I agree. I think this is a debate, but I don't think we can sit here and say, listen, there needs to have more empathy. I just want to say that you got to look at their own context.
Wonderful. And in fact, the very next question points to the other paradigm that you just put forth. What about the other people in the firm who would be a part of the firm when the retrenchment happens? So, how do you keep up with the morale of the workforce, given all the changes in the market and the future of work that is constantly changing?
Yeah, that we have to. We have, see, that's the thing. And when retrenchment happens, it's a big kind of a thing to any organization. Firstly, people who are leaving, people who are making this whole process talking, there's a lot of emotional labor they have to go through. The rest of the organization, I think we got to communicate, etc. So the role of leaders is big. I think on one hand, you got to show empathy and compassion to a large number of people. On the other hand, to the rest of the people who are staying back, you got to show a lot more positive optimism, etc. So you got to really, and that's where the leaders have to work across. It's a tough job. You have to, I mean, people who've been asked to leave, I think you're right, giving more empathy, compassion, giving them at least help in some ways, to ensure that they find their foot. In the US, it's easier because they'll find something. And the other one is for people staying back. You got to engage with them. Their morale will be low. How do you get them focused on the future? Provide optimism. So those are some things that is a bigger challenge in a way. Therefore, any company that goes through a huge round of retrenchment takes its time to really quickly come up. So yeah, but it's a challenge.
Okay. And we have the next question. The freshers who join the organizations, they come with a huge expectation of, with regards to the salary, work culture, and career graphs. But most of the companies just want to use their energy for a while and make the most of their abilities. So, how do you tackle this? How do you create that balance between the expectation of freshers who somewhere is quite top notch and what the company expects of them as well?
Yeah. No, I think see the freshers is a big one. See what has happened in the tech industry. All the freshers have come in remotely, yeah, in the last 2 years, which is also in the past. I think we used to have them join. They come like for example a company like Infosys or any other company. They go to a training center. They spend some time learning, understanding the company, the culture, etc. So I think now that's been the last 2 years all are remote. I think that adds further things. So therefore to talk to them, I think, see, there are some things that you can say, there are some things they see. And I think how do you make them understand the culture, the behaviors needed is very important. So we've got to, if you still are remote, you got to see how it is. And therefore, or having some hybrid way of inducting freshers is very important. The second thing is, so therefore, I think for them the first 6 months to a year is very critical because they get to know what works in the company, what is good. They have a lot of and therefore let's try and do that. The second part in this whole thing is really about I would say, how do you get them to really work in the teams that they go to? And therefore, that's where you need this whole idea of managers taking some time, having somebody or somebody at their level, a couple of years senior who can help them. So those kind of things are very important for freshers to really come in. So I think we've seen huge amount of challenges. I think in the past we've had a lot of them. They've all been remote, so it takes time for them to come into the system. But I think that's where a little bit of hybrid way of getting them to physical areas, talking about behaviors, talking about culture, managers mentoring them, small groups of managers talking to them will help them. But the other point is they're quick, they're learning, they're resilient, they learn very fast, and they're also quite positive minded. So I think we got to channel those energies and ensure that you can onboard them. But it's a challenge. I think this is the virtual thing makes it even more challenging. I think that's where HR and the leaders have to spend a little more time talking about the values with this group. Good. Maybe we can take one or two last questions
Yes.
and close.
We'll
Yeah.
take two last questions. And the next question is for you. Rather, what change in your leadership approach have you seen in the last 2 years?
Yeah, tough to say. I think probably I can say that I've been I've started thinking that listen, you can't control everything. There are some areas you just can't control. You'll have to leave it to the rest of the organization and the other leaders. So therefore, I've kind of done that. So that's one. So I've become less worried about certain parts, and I know that there are enough people who are there to take care of it. So I've kind of become more empowering, and that's one part there. Yeah, I think the other one is I also have realized that listen, there is a lot more you know there's so much energy that the people have in the organization and in the HR team. So you just let the teams do it; they'll do a great job. So maybe you need to interfere less, and then you just let them get along. So I've that's the other thing that I've learned that the more you allow them to do, they do a much better job. So therefore, those are the couple of areas I've probably become better in the last 2 years.
Okay. I know there are a couple of more questions, but they are from people whose questions have already been taken. So I'll take one last question from Chetna Tilak. Post COVID, how are you handling low moral challenges for your workplace?
No, I think it's a thing. I think low morale challenges are, you got to check and say what are they due to. Yeah, I think there is one low morale challenges due to this whole working from home, remote, stress, longer hours. You know that whole bucket of thing which is post COVID kind of a thing. Second one is there is also low morale saying, okay, how am I doing, individual performance, etc., etc. That's the second one. The third could be the business one. You know, it's the business doing. So there are these three elements that are there which really impacts somebody's morale, right? I think on the COVID thing, people have seen that uh, you need to continue to connect with people, you know, connect, show that empathy and connect, especially at the manager level, because you know in the tech industry many are still, let's say, almost 60 70 60 65% are still working from home. How do you really connect with them regularly and ensure that and the team is connecting, so that you know the morale due to that bucket, which is all about long hours, remote, etc., etc., is going, and various ways of connecting with them. There is this business part. I think the business, I think people have seen high morale because in the last 1 year, some business have grown a lot, you know, and the business have grown a lot, and some may be saying, okay, you know, not Indian businesses, but some of the global businesses are now shedding people, etc. And therefore, that's a business part of it that needs to be handled separately. And I think in the IT tech services, we are seeing a great morale because the business is growing. You know? There will be other individual pressures. There'll be pressures on individual performers. There'll be pressures on that I think you've got to manage through processes of talking to people at a much more individual level, using the managers to do that. So yeah, to your question on low morale, I think let's look at what are the reasons. Yeah, there are, and there are different reasons for different groups. Post COVID thing, I think, is all about connecting, empathy. That is how you got to continue to do that. But there are the other reasons you got to see, and maybe there are different groups having, and ensure that through communication is one way. Number two, clarity of career paths, clarity of learning, you know, saying, telling, giving them a future. I think that always helps, saying this is how it is, this is what will help you really grow. I think individuals really get much more energized by a lot more clarity on what they need to do. Yeah, so I think that's the other thing that we've been doing to really ensure people are understanding, and they move forward.
Okay, wonderful. I know there are many more questions that have come in, and we would have loved to take those questions, and I'm sure Krish would have also loved to answer them all. But as the day progresses, as the 2 days progress and the sessions progress, you will have those questions answered by themselves. That's an assurance from our side, definitely. So that's where the Q&A stands at, and also the keynote address by Krish. And thank you so much, Krish, for firstly sharing all those nuggets of wisdom and also taking up all the questions. We have Chinni with us for a very short, quick segment of engagement before we go ahead for further announcements and next session. Over to you, Chinni.
Thank you so much, Achla and Krish. First, I know it's an untimely hour early in the morning. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm just reflecting the last hour, the 45 minutes or so. Um, it's just amazing how we have been able to bring all the facets, starting with the business, processes, people, talent, HR itself. I think it's amazing insights that you have brought in. And I'm thinking, should we rename HR to be change managers or something more challenging on those lines? Because I think just hearing you out and seeing what's happening, change has now become way of life. It's constant. It's no longer a new thing or something we happens once in a way. So managing this and being comfortable with this and staying ahead of this becomes pretty much mainstream, I would say. So thank you so much, Krish, and great questions from the participants, from the audience. And I think we can probably spend the rest of the day on some of these questions. And I'm sure we will in some of the sessions going forward today and tomorrow. So with that, Thank you very much, Krish. Enjoyed it. Lots. I've taken about 3 pages of notes, um, and I'm
Thank you.
sure we'll use all of that, and so has everyone else. So thank you so much.